Welcome to our full-time missionary training videos. These videos are designed to help you get a firm, broad understanding of what it means to become full-time missionaries in the foreign lands. These videos will be a massive blessing and it will help you get started right in the mission field. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel because what we're going to do is be continually uploading content that will be valuable to you to help you in your work in the foreign lands. Also, if you're somebody that's wanting to get into the mission field, but you really don't know how and you need help, please contact us. There's a description in this video and we provide the link to do so. We would love to walk you through the process. Also, we have a Facebook group. That link is in there as well. That Facebook group is missionaries around the world collaborating and networking together, strengthening one another in the work that we're doing in the foreign lands. And then one final note, this whole entire series is based off of a book, Pursuing the Call, with Danny Lamastra. He's a missionary in El Salvador. I highly recommend you getting a copy of that. And again, thank you so much for being here. We pray that these videos are a blessing to you. Thank you. All right, Danny, thank you so much for jumping on here on this missionary training. You know, as I always promote your book in every video, you know, it was great of you to write that book. And, you know, I highly suggest many missionaries that are wanting to become full-time missionaries, please grab that book. I'm telling you, it will be a massive blessing. Danny and I are going to kick this off with, you know, what is the difference between a short-term and a full-time missionary? Because that's really first and foremost, and I believe in my heart, you really need to decide that. And I think sometimes people get kind of caught up in the short-term missions and all of a sudden now they're wanting to become a missionary. And, you know, I'm not saying that that's not the right heart. I'm just saying that you got to be careful because there's a big, massive difference between short-term and full-time missions, and short-term missions are definitely designed differently than a full-time mission experience. So anyway, and I just, you know, just let me take a little bit of time here. Danny is a missionary in El Salvador. He was working with the prison ministry. And then prior to that, or prior to COVID, and then COVID hit and they dialed back the prison ministry. So Danny is now working at a Christian school now as a teacher. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And unfortunately, Danny is at home right now because he has COVID. So anyway, doesn't look like it, and he says he's feeling great. So welcome. Thanks a lot for jumping on here, Danny.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for the compliments on the book. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, it just, you deserve it, man. I mean, I brag on you. I told the guy the other day, I said, you know, his mom said, since you're just cooped up, you know, with the pandemic, why don't you write the book? And then in a short period of time, you wrote an incredible book. And, you know, I've been on the mission field for 8 years and I gleaned things out of it as well. You inspired me in some things and, you know, it made me, you know, make some adjustments in my ministry as well. So, you know, even for people that's been on the mission field, I think it can be a massive blessing as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So anyway, just kind of jump into the training here. You know, I'm sure you agree, short-term missions and full-time missions is definitely different. I mean, obviously some person is going to go, well, duh, you're going to be on the mission field for a week to 2 weeks versus, you know, a lifetime potentially. But no, it's not just that simple. It's a lot more involved than that. So, you know, if you don't mind, just share with me, what do you think, Danny, as far as between short-term and full-time?
Yeah. So first of all, I would just say the concept of short-term missions trips is a relatively modern concept in terms of church history. Really, the invention of the plane is what has enabled people to be able to do a short-term trip where you're going to a foreign country, staying there for a week or two, and, you know, maybe even a month, but then coming back to your home country rather than staying for an extended period of time. Prior to the invention of the plane, this was not something that was possible because you could not travel as easily. And so people that generally went for an extended period of time and stayed places for an extended period of time. The closest thing that you may be able to get to quote unquote short-term missions in the Bible would be during the journeys of Paul. There's a number of places where he stays at for a very short period of time on his missionary journeys. There's some places where he stays at only 7 days or so, for example. But they were always part of longer term ministry. They were always connected to year long, and when I say year, really years long, multiple year journeys. And so the concept of short term missions as we understand it now is a relatively modern concept. And I think that's important just to mention that out of the gate. As far as the differences are, what are the differences between short term missions and long term missions? I think there's a lot. And I think that we'll probably get into a lot, but I think a good starting point is to understand from a cultural perspective the stages of culture shock that a person goes through, or in other words, the stages of acculturation that a person goes through. So if you study culture, if you study cultural anthropology, what you'll find is that there's several stages that take place when a person is becoming acclimated to a new culture, which is something that everybody does when they go to the mission field. It's not to say that that's the only reason why you would ever need to become acclimated to a new culture, but obviously every missionary that's going to another culture has to become acclimated to the new environment. And so if you start out your journey in a new culture, you start out on what's known as the honeymoon phase, where everything's awesome, it's an adventure, it's cool, you're excited about the new experience. From there, you go into what's known as culture shock. And culture shock is basically that crashing of, I miss home. Where am I? What am I doing?
Why did I?
Exactly. All that is going through your mind. That can last several months. And if in a healthy transition, that's not going to last more than maybe 6 months tops. So you will get through that. But then from that point, you begin the process of learning the culture. And I say begin the process. You've already begun the process. But really, you begin that upward trajectory out of culture shock and into acculturation. And according to missiologist Sherwin Lingenfelter, the most that a person can ever hope to become fully acclimated to a new culture once you're an adult is about 75%. So according to him, that's just his opinion. But he says that once you get to that 75% point, you're probably going to start to level out because you've had so many different things ingrained into you from your home culture your entire life that it's hard for you to ever get to that point where you're fully 100% acculturated to another culture. Now, that's a very, very long explanation. But the reason why I mentioned all of that is because when we talk about short-term missions, we are never really talking about an experience where you're on the mission field long enough to get past that honeymoon phase and into that culture shock phase and beyond.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest difference for me in terms of the experience that you have as a person on a short-term missions trip and a long-term missions commitment can be summed up in that understanding that on a short-term missions trip, you're never going to leave that honeymoon stage normally. You're going to stay in that honeymoon stage. And so it's going to be an awesome experience. And besides that, when you go on a short-term missions trip, you're really not getting as close to the culture as you are when you go long-term either, because of the fact that you're normally doing this with a group of people that is also from your home culture. That's also, you're spending the majority of the day speaking your native language. If you go anywhere, you have people that are there to orient you, to guide you. Everything's designed for you to have a great experience, right? But when you're a full-term missionary, you are not always going to have people around you on a regular 24/7 basis that are from your home culture.
Exactly.
You have people around you that speak your native language. You're not always going to have people around you that can guide you and orient you to the many nuances of just everyday life in a foreign country. And so all of those different kind of conveniences that are available to you on a short-term missions trip are not available to you necessarily in a long-term missions commitment. And even if they are, you are eventually going to get past that honeymoon stage and hit culture shock at some point and then start to level off eventually.
Yeah. Well, just like, for example, today, I told you I was out in the mountains and, I didn't necessarily tell you why I was out in the mountains. We have a relationship with a ministry here and the director, or I don't want to say owner of the ministry, but I guess the one that founded and started the ministry, she lives like an hour and a half out in the mountains. And we're wanting to bring a team here in November, and we are considering on doing some work in her area. Well, what were we doing? We were looking at sleeping facilities. We were looking at dining facilities, kitchens. How will the food be prepared? I mean, we were examining every detail of that potential trip. And so more or less, it's kind of like we're rolling out the red carpet for, I'm just saying it in a loving, funny way, gringos to come from the US. We're rolling out the red carpet. Why? Basically, we don't want them to feel any pain of the culture, So more or less, we're like, okay, is this facility fine for them to sleep in? Is the beds clean? Is the facility clean? I mean, we're just going down through a checklist to make sure that they get an experience of missions in a sense. I don't want to say, how do I want to say this? They get an experience of missions that we want them to experience, but let's say, for example, if it was a missionary that was here and said, look, I'm full-time missions, I'm going to be a part of your organization. They come here, they've been here for, like a month or something like that. I'd be like, okay, there's a bus out there. Go catch that bus. They're going to take you an hour and a half out in the mountains. The lady's going to meet you. She's going to put you in a room, and there'll be some lady cooking for you. I mean, so see, just totally different mindset. So I think what Danny and I are trying to explain is people are at crossroads. I see it all the time. People come on short-term missions, and all of a sudden now they're wanting to become missionaries. People get at those crossroads, and I respect that. But I think that people need to understand that, how do I say this? That there's more to it than what they're experiencing on those short terms. And what Danny was sharing is you've got to go beyond that thought process. And let me try to give this example. I watch these, what do they call them? Like, building homes off grid. I love those shows. They're building a cabin out in the middle of nowhere in Alaska. They got solar panel. They got a water collection. I mean, they're totally sustainable, And I'm just thinking, man, it would be awesome to build a house like that, with Adobe and all these. I got all these wild ideas running through my mind. And I was thinking about that the other day, and I'm 53 years old. And I'm thinking, man, I just don't want to build a house for the next 5 years. You know what I mean? So I'm saying is the honeymoon of dreaming and thinking how great this house would be is just fun to dream about. But when you really put reality to it, is the backaches of building the house, the 5 years of building the house, the money to raise to build the house, to build the wall. I mean, just the whole entire thing. I was like, no, I don't want to do it. And I think that's what you have to do when you're really looking at short-time and full-time missions, is really, do you want to go to the point of, like you said, dealing with the culture, changing your mindsets, things like that? Because again, what you're experiencing on short-term missions is not full-time missions. I mean, what do you think about that?
No, I think that's true. And taking into consideration who is probably watching this video, potential future missionaries. So I guess my message to them would be that short-term missions has a role in your formation as you're preparing to become a full-time missionary. Mm-hmm. I definitely think that if you're going to move overseas, it is a good idea to do a mission trip, right? With the understanding that it's not going to be fully what your experience will be overseas, but at the very least, it will give you a little bit, like a snippet, a dipping your toes in the water, if you will. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to move somewhere, if you're going to move overseas, if you're going to be learning a new language, if you're going to be eating new food, if you're going to be experiencing a new ministry, I would think that you would want to have like a little preview of that, at least, even though that the preview isn't going to be the whole package of what your experience would be full time. But the best thing that you can do in terms of preparing for long-term ministry is getting involved in long-term ministry. And so if you are, let's just say the United States, right? Missionaries go from everywhere to everywhere. So that's not to say that the United States is the only country that says missionaries, but just that's where you're from. Just using that as an example. If you're in the United States, the best thing that you can do to get involved to prepare yourself for long-term ministry overseas is getting involved in long-term ministry locally. So if you want to do youth ministry overseas, get involved in youth ministry locally.
Yes.
If you want to do children's ministry overseas, get involved in children's ministry locally. That's not to say you shouldn't go on missions trips, because going on a few missions trips to get a little bit of a preview, like I said, dip your toes in the water, to be able to at least get a little bit of a sense of what it could potentially be like overseas. But that week-long experience or 2-week-long experience isn't going to prepare you as much for ministry as that long-term experience of serving in ministry will, even if the context is a little bit different.
Yeah. Now, I think, just sitting here thinking in my mind, I think, like you're saying, if you feel like you have a call for mission work, I mean, I think it's evident in your life. Like in my situation, I wasn't even thinking about missions at all, zero, zilch. And so my pastor said, "Hey, I'm going to Honduras on a mission trip," and the Spirit of God just leaped in my heart and said, "You go." So when I went, that's where I started the honeymoon. Hey, this is awesome. I think we're going to be missionaries. I think we should come down here, live down here. Now, I'm not some flaky guy, just all of a sudden, one minute I want to do this, the next minute I want to do that. So basically I came down here. Yes, I did get the honeymoon experience. Yes, I did get the goosebumps. I thought it was all exciting. I went home, told my wife that we're going to move to Honduras. Well, my wife thought it was crazy. Okay. But see, I think what Danny's saying is what I did in the 5 years of preparing. It wasn't like, it was the right time of God when we got on ground here. But in those 5 years, what did I do? I continually came back. I spent 3 months down here one time. I spent 2 months down here one time. And trust me, I didn't put myself in situations where, hey, I'm a missionary, treat me, or I'm a short-term missionary, treat me like a short-term missionary. No, I'm a missionary, treat me like a missionary. Throw me to the wolves. I'm not looking for a padded red carpet experience. I'm looking for the real deal. And I think that's what I did. And then obviously I brought my wife down here. I brought my daughter down here for them to experience it, look at the situation and so forth. And again, we weren't on some planned short-term mission trip. I mean, we came down here to experience the culture, the community, and communicate with the people that we were going to connect with on the ground. So now, so I think what Danny's saying is you've got to be continually involved in the waiting period in that area where you want to perform missions. Yes, you should go on short-term mission trips, but I think if you have an opportunity, not all people can because of employment and things like that, you should take some long-term trips as well, because that's really going to start, separating the truth from, the feelings of that I want to become a missionary. And really it's not there because God didn't call you there.
Yeah. I would add a couple things to that. First of all, if you're, in a position where you're able to take several months off, maybe you're a college student, you have summer break or something like that, there are a lot of missions organizations that have internship opportunities. And so what Sean just said is a really great idea. If you're able to, the further you're able to extend your time, the more of the real experience you will have. That's not to say, again, that if you're going as an intern for 3 months, that you're still not going to have people that are catering to you and helping you maybe a little bit more than if you were to move overseas. But it would definitely get you a little bit closer to the real experience than just going for a week, for example. But anyway, I wanted to loop back to something else that you said as far as the role that missions trips played in your life. Because interesting, as I think about my own journey, missions trips definitely played a role in my journey as well, short-term missions trips. Now, ironically, the missions trip that I think of that had the biggest impact on my life was actually to Honduras as well. My final year in college, I took a missions trip to Honduras, and it was just a week, but it really made a big impact on my life. And when I look back at like my journey to becoming a missionary, that week in Honduras was probably one of the key moments for me that really solidified that desire to become a missionary. Mm-hmm. But when I think about what formed me into the missionary that I am, what are the experiences that formed me and molded me and shaped me? I think more about the long-term ministry opportunities that I had the chance to get involved in. And so I think that both play a role, like the long-term volunteering at your church, mission center, whatever the case may be locally. I think that's something that helps to form you but I think that the short-term mission trip, that helps to solidify your calling. That helps you to be able to like recognize whether or not that's something that God may be calling you into. I think it's something that God can use to pique your interest, to pique your attention, and to get your attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100% because I myself believe that God has, when God calls you to a work, he's going to call you to a specific place. I believe that, and so like in my case, I use the short-term mission trips to zero in the area of country where God wanted me to go to. And, I first started out in La Entrada, Honduras. And then out of that, I was there, like I said, the 2-3 months, and then we would take the team to Copan to relax and go tour and stuff like that. And so it's just kind of like, wow, I really like this town. But then I started doing mission work in Tegucigalpa, which is definitely a different area of country. But we would always somehow get drawn back to Copan because the doctor friend of mine, he would go into Guatemala and do medical missions. So we would come through to here. So it's just kind of like in my prayer time, God kept on showing me Copan. And so then when I made my final decision, my friend dropped me off here for a week while he was doing medical missions in Guatemala. And literally, as soon as I hit the central park of this area, it's just like the Spirit of God leaped in my heart. I knew this is my area. So I think even in short-term mission trips, it can help you zero in where God is wanting you to connect either through we pioneered our work here. I mean, we started our work here, but there's, like Danny, he connected with an organization. So obviously not only location, but also organizations that you're going to need to connect to do your mission work if that's the path you go through. So, there's a list here that we kind of, that was in this outline. It said difference between short-term and full-time missions. Everything's provided for you: housing, food, translator. This is short-term: transportation, ministry opportunities, and work supplies. I mean, again, we're going to pick up a team at the airport on November 1st. I mean, everything is being ready for them, rolled out, the whole entire plan, itinerary, everything. They're going to know exactly what they're going to do every day. But, on full-time, nothing's provided for you. You have to set up everything yourself. Again, obviously, you could connect to an organization like Danny did. And yes, there might be some more structure to that, which I'm sure you experienced structure when you join the organization. We ourselves, again, pioneered our work. So we are the ones that basically, we threw ourselves to the wolves, so to speak. Then it says a like-minded community group travels with you, just like you were saying, these are people of your community, your culture. And then in the other sense of being full-time, no, you go into a different minded community and you're alone. Again, this is a dramatic statement because, I mean, we weren't alone here, but again, we were in the culture, and definitely there's a definite difference between, the culture and not, meaning our U.S. culture and their culture is definitely different. And I was having a conversation with a gentleman the other night. And I mean, I've been here 8 years and he was telling me things about this culture that I didn't even realize. And it was just dumbfounding, about like how you enter a room, with a group of people. How do you enter a room? How do you address the people? Like if you want to go speak to one person, you still need to say hello to everybody. You can't just walk in, directly go to one person, deal your business, and then walk out because they would consider that offensive. Again, just gringos don't think that way, work is a group for a short time, but you work full time is you work alone or with ministry partners long term. And then like a short term is an unrealistic portrayal of what actual life would be like. Because again, if you're in hotels and eating restaurant food or food prepared specifically for you, it's definitely different because reality of life quickly sets in when you're a full-time missionary. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot of definite differences. And, obviously Danny and I can't cover everything, but I would highly recommend anybody that's considering this and you are having connections with people actually in country. I would definitely talk to several people or couples or whatever, and really say, what are some things that you dealt with that I need to be prepared for? And you really need to consider the cost. I mean, the Bible says what man builds a tower without considering the cost? It's the same thing. You've got to consider the cost if you are willing to really enter into this culture and in this environment and be a longtime missionary. Knowing you more, you seem like a very squared away, organized young gentleman. I don't know about you, even though you're joining an organization, you still had a vision in your heart in the sense of knowing your plan. You were having a plan in mind of what you were wanting to achieve once you hit ground in the sense of what you were going to do for the organization. And I don't think you just, sell the house and pack the bags and throw the kids, on a plane and jump down here. I mean, there's got to, to me, a full-time missionary is going to walk in with a plan. And that's the same thing with us. I mean, when we got here, we knew what we were going to do. We knew who we were going to connect with. We knew what our heart was and where we're going to go and who we were going to devote our attention to. So I think that's the same thing. You can't just kind of haphazardly say, I'm wanting to become a missionary. And, oh, by the way, this is the date that we're going to leave. And, oh, by the way, we're going to go talk to a few people, raise some money, and then we're going to jump on a plane. It just doesn't work that way, And I think that sometimes people, you could see short-term missions would be that in the sense that you are going to just, hey, this is a mission trip. Hey, I'm going to raise some money. Hey, I'm going to jump on a plane. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be back in a week. That's not the way it works with full-time missions. There's a lot of preparation. And in that preparation, you know where you're going and you know what you're going to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say two things to that. One of the things that you kind of touched on is fundraising. Fundraising for a short-term missions trip and fundraising for a long-term missions commitment is very, very different. Because for a short-term missions trip, you're going to be raising primarily one-time donations. Whereas for a long-term missions commitment, you're going to be trying to raise up monthly support or annual support or reoccurring support. So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. I'm sure that in the video about fundraising, that would be discussed in greater detail. But that is another difference that we could mention. The other thing that I did just want to say, as far as what you mentioned, with having a plan, whether it's a short-term missions trip or a long-term missions trip, whatever your plan is, I think that just be open to potentially altering it or changing it at some point.
Yeah, sure.
Plans are awesome, and we should definitely plan. But my experience in ministry, and especially in ministry overseas, is that plans have a way of changing unexpectedly. God has a way of leading in new areas, new directions, and sometimes life circumstances have a way of shutting some doors and opening other doors. One of the things that you mentioned was before the pandemic started, I was heavily in prison ministry. And that was really the only thing that I saw, for the next however long I was here was prison ministry. But with the restrictions that were put in place with visitation and things of that nature, because of the pandemic, all of that kind of got upended and changed. And so, yeah, as far as plans go, I would just encourage anybody, plan, but be open to the plan potentially changing. As circumstances change, as God leads and guides in new directions. And also as you learn the culture more, you may realize that there's some adjustments that you need to make to your original plan. I'm a big believer that whenever you are newly arriving into a new culture, you should always adopt the posture of a learner, somebody who wants to learn. Like Sean was saying, he's been there 8 years in Honduras, and there's still things that he recognizes that he can learn, right? Whenever you arrive somewhere thinking that you know everything, that's always a dangerous territory to be in. You always want to have that learner mentality, especially when you're brand new in a culture. I'll say in my experience, I studied culture a lot on an academic level, spent a lot of time reading about it, writing about it. I was even nominated for an undergraduate research award for a paper that I wrote about culture. So I spent a lot of time studying culture and reading about culture. But I will say that what you read in a textbook and what you experience in real life aren't always identical. Like there's things that from the book that will help you to be able to have a better understanding, ahead of time before you arrive. But there's other things that you can only learn on the ground, if you will. There's other things that you're never going to learn in a textbook about the culture that you're going to. And so I would just, encourage you to have that learning mentality, whether it's a short-term trip or a long-term trip. If it's a short-term trip, you're probably going to have that learning mentality for the whole time, right? If
Yeah.
it's a long-term trip, it's still good to have a learner's mindset, the whole time. But eventually you will get to a point, where you do have a pretty decent understanding of the culture, and you're able to shift a little bit from just being a learner to also being able to contribute, and even in some cases to challenge maybe some cultural norms that don't necessarily vibe fully with the gospel.
Closing, just wanted to just share one thing. And if you get anything out of this, I really want to encourage anybody that's considering full-time missions is you need to put in the effort to do the proper research to really, really figure out, is this what you want to do? Are you wanting to deal with these type of potential issues with culture? These type of living conditions, these type of things that will be expected of you. Because if you don't put in the proper homework, that short-term missions is not going to give you the reality of what full-time missions is. And I know I already gave one example. I'm going to give one more example. I had a friend that had a bird called is an African gray. If anybody doesn't know what they are, they can talk really well, and they can mimic like their owners. And my friend had an African gray, and he could talk exactly like him, laugh like him. And I thought it was really cool. So I thought, wow, I want an African gray. So I went home, and see, I'm not one of these guys that just kind of like jump in with both feet. I like research. So at the time, there was no internet. So I went to the store and got books and so forth, and did research on being, the responsibilities of owning an African gray. And trust me, after reading those books, I didn't get an African gray because of all the things that those birds expect of you to take care of them. I wasn't willing to put in the effort. So it's really comes down to the same thing. You've got to connect with people in the mission field, quiz them, develop questions, drill them, ask them questions, learn about the culture, learn about the living conditions, learn the expectations of what will be expected of you, and make a decision. Are you willing to do that? And there's a couple that came here to look at doing mission work within our area. We took them all up into the mountains and took them all to the communities and showed them everything. And they were looking for apartments to rent. They were gung ho. They were like, we're going to do this. And they came down to, they said, what do you want us to do while we're here? And I said, well, we really need somebody to develop leadership in the mountains, for the churches. And they're like, oh, okay, great. And then, so like, what would you expect us to do? Well, you need to go there to the communities that's, maybe certain days of the week and develop classes and develop leaders. Well, how are we going to get up there? I'm like, you'll drive? What? We're going to drive? Yeah, you're going to drive. You're going to have to buy a truck and you have to drive up there. Well, we're from Florida. We've never drove in the mountains. And again, I'm not making fun of them. I mean, I respect what they did, because they weren't willing to drive the mountains, and again, please, whomever's watching this video, this isn't about making fun of them. They were asking the right questions. They weren't allowing this short-term mission trip to have all the warm and fuzzies. They were considering everything, and they've asked us multiple questions. Well, what did they do? They decided not to come because that was not in their heart to drive in the mountains. Now, are they missionaries? Absolutely. They're in another area of the country, and they're doing an incredible job. Guess what? It's in a valley. It's in a flat area. Sure, maybe they have gone up in the mountains since then, but, again, they considered all costs, and out of that, they made adjustments of where they wanted to go do missions, and now they're flourishing today. So anyway, just want to encourage everybody to do your proper research, spend time in the mission field, spend time in the area where you're wanting to do missions, and consider the cost. Do you have anything else you want to add in closing, Danny?
No, I think that we've done it all. We've said it all already.
Okay.
So
all right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I know you're going to be joining me on fundraising as well. And that's going to be an also awesome class as well. So thanks a lot, Danny. God bless you, brother.